She pushed the cleaning cart down the 38th floor hallway of Cole Medical Tower at 12:47 in the morning, and the only sound was the soft squeak of rubber wheels on polished marble. 65 years old, gray uniform, name badge on her chest that read, Margaret No Last Name. The motion sensor lights flickered on one panel at a time. As she moved, each one triggered by her presence, each one going dark again behind her. She was the only reason this floor came alive at this hour. She had been doing this exact walk, this exact hallway, these exact lights, blinking on and off like a slow heartbeat for 2 years, 731 nights. She stopped at the end of the hall. Through the glass wall of the corner office, she could see everything exactly as she had left it the night before. The desk pushed slightly off-center, the way he always left it when he had been thinking hard. The stack of folders on the left side, always the left. The coffee mug near the edge, the one he never remembered to rinse. And on the shelf behind the desk, a row of framed photographs, award ceremonies, ribbon cuttings, handshakes with people whose names filled newspapers. And in the far corner of that shelf, smaller than the others, a simple, dark frame holding a photograph of a woman and a boy. The boy was maybe 7 years old, standing in front of a little yellow house on what looked like a Sunday morning, squinting into the sun with the kind of grin that only exists before life gets complicated. She was that woman. That boy was her son. And her son had no idea his mother had been cleaning his office every single night for the past 2 years. Margaret pushed open the glass door and stepped inside. She started with the trash can, pulled the liner, tied it off, replaced it. Her hands no longer needed instructions. They simply moved the way hands move when something has been learned so deeply it becomes part of the body rather than the mind. She wiped the desk in slow, even strokes, straightened the folders without disturbing his system, rinsed the coffee mug, dried it, set it back in its exact spot. Then she adjusted the photograph in the corner, just slightly, tilting the dark frame so the woman and the boy faced the desk more directly, so that if he ever looked up from his work at the right moment, the first thing he would see was the two of them standing in front of that yellow house. Back when the world was smaller, back when she was the most important person in it, he never noticed. That was the point. She moved to the bookshelf, straightening the spines, until they lined up clean and even. Medical journals, policy reports, and near the end of the row, a management book she had given him for his 35th birthday, its spine cracked from years of use. She ran her fingers across it for just a moment, not long enough to be called anything other than work, but long enough to feel it. She was nearly finished when she reached the trash liner she had set aside and noticed something she had missed on the first pass: a folded document, several pages creased like they had been handled many times before being thrown away. She almost let it go. In 2 years, she had learned not to read what she found in this office. But something made her pause. Not curiosity, something older than that. 23 years of working emergency rooms had taught her to read the small details that most people walked right past. The weight of it, the way it was folded tight, deliberate, like something hidden rather than discarded. The faint impression of a red stamp on the top corner, visible even through the crease. In the emergency room, the most serious situations rarely announced themselves loudly. They came in quietly, dressed in ordinary clothes, looking like something routine. You learned to trust the feeling that something was slightly wrong before you could explain why. This felt slightly wrong. She didn't unfold it. Not here. She smoothed the pages carefully and tucked the document into the front pocket of her uniform beneath her name badge, and told herself she would look at it at home where the light was better. She finished the office, turned off the light, and pulled the glass door shut behind her. In the hallway, she stood still for a moment, the way she always did after the work was done, before moving on. This was the stillest part of the night, just her and the quiet hum of a building that didn't know she was inside it. She reached into her right pocket and felt her phone. There was a voicemail sitting on it, left at 4:17 that afternoon by her cardiologist, a woman with a calm, careful voice that Margaret had always trusted. The kind of voice that delivered hard news without looking away. She hadn't listened to it yet. She told herself it was because she'd been busy getting ready for work. Then she told herself she'd listen on her break. She put the phone back in her pocket. Not tonight. Whatever that voice was going to say, not tonight. She gripped the handle of her cart and turned toward the elevator. That was when she saw it. At the far end of the hallway, near the supply closet, a shadow shifted. Just slightly, the way a shadow moves when the body casting it decides at the last second to stop. Someone was standing there. Margaret went still. The hallway lights had already gone dark behind her, leaving nothing ahead but shadow. She couldn't see a face, only an outline, a figure standing very still now the way a person stands when they realize they've been seen. She didn't move. Neither did they. There are certain nights a mother never forgets. Not the big ones, not the birthdays, or the graduations, or the moments that get framed and hung on walls. The ones she never forgets are the quiet ones. The ones where it was just her and her child, and the dark, and she had to figure it out alone. 23 years ago, Margaret Cole was 42 years old, pulling overnight shifts in the emergency department at Grady Memorial Hospital in Atlanta. 12 hours at a stretch, worn sneakers a badge that carried her full name back then. She had worked that floor long enough to know what a real emergency looked like before the monitors started screaming, and long enough to understand that the hardest part of the job was never the medicine. It was watching people sit in the waiting room with a sick child and a face that had already done the math on what they couldn't afford. She had been that person. She knew exactly what that math felt like. Her son, Nathan, was 12 years old the winter his fever climbed to 104. It started on a Tuesday evening, a little warm, a little quiet, the kind of thing a mother notices before the thermometer confirms it. By midnight, he was shaking under 2 blankets, and she was sitting on the edge of his bed with a cool cloth. And that feeling in her chest, she recognized from the emergency room. The kind that said, "This is not nothing." She picked up the phone. Put it down. The copay alone was $200. She had $63 in her checking account in 11 days until her next paycheck. So she did what she knew how to do. She pulled every piece of knowledge from 15 years of nursing, and she sat with her son through the night. Cool compresses every 20 minutes. Fluids every hour. She monitored his breathing the way she monitored patients on her floor. Steady, without panic. Because panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. She did not sleep. By 4 a.m, the fever broke. She sat beside his bed and listened to his breathing, slow, into something deep and easy. She pressed her hand to his forehead. Cool. She closed her eyes. She didn't cry until she got to the bathroom. She turned the faucet on so he wouldn't hear. Nathan never forgot that night. Not because he understood everything. He was 12. He understood enough. What he understood was that his mother had sat beside him for 6 hours in the dark and had not left. Not once. 6 years later, the night before he left for college, on a full academic scholarship, he sat across from her at the kitchen table and said quietly, "Mama, I'm going to build something so that no kid ever has to wait outside an ER because his mom can't cover the bill." She looked at her son across that table, 18 years old backpack already by the door, and she believed him completely. Not because mothers always believe their children, because she had been watching this particular child his entire life, and she knew the difference between a wish and a promise. That was a promise. He kept it. Cole Medical Group opened its first clinic in Southwest Atlanta when Nathan was 31. By 39, there were 14 locations across the city, every one of them planted in a neighborhood where people had historically driven 40 minutes to see a doctor, or simply gone without. His name appeared in business publications beside words like visionary and mission-driven. Margaret had a folder at home with every article. She kept it in the kitchen drawer underneath the takeout menus. She remembered the call when he signed his first investor. He was 25, calling from a borrowed office, and she could hear the grin before he said a word. "Mama, we got our first investor." 6 words. But the way he said, "We like she was in that room with him," like everything she had given up to get him there, had a seat at the table that we had stayed with her for 20 years. It was the last time he called just to share something good. After that, the calls got shorter, then less frequent, then the kind of thing that got penciled into a calendar and lasted 10 minutes and ended with, "I'll call you next week," a sentence she had learned slowly to stop believing. 9 months ago, he stopped calling altogether, not in anger, not after a fight. He had simply gotten busy and then busier, and then the kind of busy that makes a person stop noticing the things that have gone quiet. She understood. She didn't like it, but she understood. Margaret let herself into her house in Vine City just before 7 in the morning, still in her gray uniform. She dropped her keys in the bowl by the door and walked past the hallway of photographs Nathan, at 4, at 9, at 18, up through 32. Then, nothing. The wall went blank in the years when everything moved too fast for anyone to stop and take a picture that included her. She made her way to the bathroom and stood in front of the mirror. Gray uniform, tired eyes, the particular stillness of a woman who had been holding something together for a long time and was starting to wonder how much longer her hands could manage it. She reached into her left pocket and took out her phone to check the time. The screen lit up, a text message. Number she didn't recognize, no name, no area code she knew. "Mrs. Cole, we know you work in the building. We need to talk. Tonight." She read it once, then again, her free hand still resting on the edge of the sink, closed slowly into a fist. She had lived in this house for 31 years, and she still couldn't walk down the hallway without stopping. It wasn't a long hallway, 12 feet, maybe 14, but the walls on both sides were lined with photographs, and no matter how tired she was, no matter how many floors she had cleaned, or how many hours she had been on her feet, she always stopped somewhere in the middle of it. The photographs began near the front door. Nathan, at 4 years old, standing in the front yard with a plastic baseball bat, squinting into the afternoon sun with an expression of absolute seriousness, like hitting that ball was the most important thing in the world. Nathan, at 9, in a suit, 2 sizes too big, at his grandmother's funeral, his small hand tucked inside hers. Nathan, at 14, on the basketball court, mid-jump, the ball just leaving his fingers. Then 18. Graduation cap diploma, the smile of someone standing at the edge of everything they'd been working toward. Then 24, 28, then nothing. The wall went blank. Not because nothing had happened. Everything had happened. The clinics, the investors, the cover stories, the buildings with his name above the entrance. All of it had happened. It had simply happened in rooms she was not in, at speeds that left no space for someone to stop and say, "Come stand beside me. I want to remember this with you." She stood in front of the last photograph for a moment. Nathan, at 28, shaking hands with someone at what looked like a groundbreaking ceremony. Dirt on his shoes, grinning like the boy with the baseball bat. And then she kept walking toward the kitchen. She filled the kettle, set it on the stove, sat down at the table. The document was still in her pocket. She had carried it for 6 hours without looking at it, which was longer than she would have carried anything suspicious in the emergency room. In the ER, you acted on instinct quickly, or you didn't act at all. But this was different. This was her son's office. These were her son's things. And the instinct she was following now was older and quieter than anything she had developed on a hospital floor. She spread the pages out on the table under the kitchen light. It took her a few minutes to understand the language legal and financial dense with terms she hadn't encountered since Nathan had once walked her through a contract. He was proud of explaining each section with the patience of someone who wanted to share what they had built. But the structure of it she understood. Charts, timelines, names, figures that didn't line up the way they should. 23 years in emergency medicine had taught her one thing above everything else. The story the paperwork told was not always the story that had actually happened. You learned to read the gap between the two. There was a gap here, a significant one. She didn't know yet who had put it there, or why, or how deep it ran. But she knew what it meant for her son, the same way she had known standing in a waiting room 2 years ago with a newspaper in her hands that something was wrong before anyone had said it plainly. 2 years ago, she had been sitting in the waiting room of her own doctor's office. A routine visit, nothing urgent when she picked up a business publication from the side table. She almost put it back. Then she saw her son's name in the headline. The article was careful, measured, the kind of journalism that presents facts without conclusions and lets the reader do the arithmetic. It described an ongoing federal inquiry into billing irregularities at a healthcare company. It named no individuals directly, but it named the company. And it described, in careful, neutral language, a pattern that Margaret recognized, the way she recognized the sound of a cardiac monitor going wrong before the alarm triggered. She had read the article 3 times in that waiting room. By the time her name was called, she had already made a decision she hadn't fully admitted to herself yet. She went home that afternoon and sat at this same table and thought about calling him. She picked up the phone twice, put it down twice. She knew how that call would go. He would tell her everything was fine, that she didn't need to worry, that he had people handling it. He would say it warmly, and he would mean it, and it would be the most efficient way possible of telling her to stay out of something she didn't understand. He was wrong that she didn't understand. He just didn't know what she understood. So she hadn't called. Instead, 3 weeks later, she had walked into the offices of the facilities contractor that serviced Cole Medical Tower and filled out an application for the night custodial crew. She used her first and middle name. She left the last name blank. She wasn't there because she missed him. Though she did, in the deep and specific way, you miss someone who is still alive, but has drifted past the point where ordinary reaching can touch them. She was there because something in that article had set off the same quiet alarm she had learned to trust in 30 years of watching over people who didn't know they needed watching. Her son was in the middle of something he couldn't see clearly from where he was standing. And she had spent her entire career standing in the places nobody else thought to look. She turned to the last page of the document. At the bottom, in the kind of plain administrative typeface that made serious things look routine, was a deadline. Federal response required by Friday. 5 p.m. She looked up at the clock on the kitchen wall. 6:51 in the morning. Tuesday. 58 hours. She sat with that number for a moment. Then she reached into her left pocket and felt the outline of her phone. The voicemail from Dr. Ellison was still sitting there, unheard, the way it had been sitting there since 4:17 yesterday afternoon. She took her hand out of her pocket. 58 hours. One thing at a time. While Margaret Cole was sitting at her kitchen table in Vine City, watching the clock on the wall, her son was 12 miles west, alone, on the 38th floor of the building that carried his name, staring at a laptop screen in the dark. It was 3:14 in the morning. Nathan Cole was 41 years old, founder and chief executive of Cole Medical Group, 14 community health clinics operating across Atlanta, a company valued at just over $800 million, built from nothing over the course of 15 years through a combination of genuine vision and the kind of relentless grinding work that doesn't make for interesting stories, but makes for real companies. He had been named to 3 national lists in the past 2 years. He had been photographed shaking hands with 2 governors and a senator. He had a corner office on the 38th floor with a view of the Atlanta skyline that cost more per square foot than most people in this city earned in a month. He was also, by any honest measure, exhausted in a way that sleep had stopped fixing some time ago. His days started at 6 and didn't stop. Back-to-back calls, site reviews, investor meetings, legal briefings that had become, over the past several months, a permanent fixture on his calendar. He ate most of his meals at his desk. He exercised when he remembered to. He lived in a penthouse in Midtown that he had chosen for its proximity to the office and rarely experienced for any other reason. He was not an unhappy man. That was worth saying clearly. He believed in what he had built. He still felt on the good days the same pull that had driven him at 25. The sense that what he was doing mattered, that the clinics were real, and the people walking through their doors were real, And the thing he had promised his mother at a kitchen table in Vine City was being kept. He just couldn't remember the last time he told her so. 9 months. That was how long it had been since he'd spoken to her. Not because anything had happened between them. No argument, no falling out, nothing dramatic. He had simply let the weeks slide. The way weeks slide when every day is already spoken for before it begins. He had a reminder on his phone. Every Sunday, 10 in the morning, call Mom. He had dismissed it 39 consecutive times. Each time, he told himself the same thing. Next week. 39. Next week's was 9 months. He knew that. He had done the math once late at night and then put his phone face down on his desk and gone back to work. Tonight, he had stayed because of the footage. 3 weeks ago, one of his overnight security staff had flagged something routine, a notification that someone on the cleaning crew had been spending longer than expected on the executive floor. Standard protocol was to note it and move on. Nathan had told them to pull the camera file instead. He hadn't been able to explain why at the time. Something about the way the report was worded. Something that snagged. He opened the file now for the 4th time. The timestamp read 1:43 in the morning, 2 weeks prior. The footage was from the hallway camera, outside his office, wide angle, slightly grainy, in the low light. The kind of quality that captured shapes more reliably than faces. A figure moved into frame from the left, pushing a cleaning cart at the steady pace of someone who knew exactly where they were going. Female. Older, the posture and the pace said it clearly even if the image didn't. Gray uniform. She stopped the cart outside his office and went in. Nathan had watched this part before. What he kept coming back to was what happened after. She was inside for 11 minutes. Standard for a thorough clean of a space that size. When she came back out, she stood in the hallway just outside his office door, and she did something he had not been able to fully account for in 3 weeks of thinking about it. She stopped. Not to check her cart, not to look at her phone. She just stopped. Stood facing the glass wall of his office, looking in for 4 minutes and 17 seconds. He had timed it. He had timed it 3 separate times, because he kept not believing the number. 4 minutes and 17 seconds. Standing completely still in a dark hallway at 2 in the morning, looking into an empty office. The camera angle was wrong for a clear read on her face. He could see the shape of her short, gray-haired hands clasped in front of her, the way a person clasps their hands when they are trying to hold themselves very still. But the face was lost to the low light and the angle and the particular cruelty of security footage, which recorded everything and revealed almost nothing. He had asked his head of security to identify her. The man had come back the next morning with the name from the contractor's roster, Margaret A. No last name on file, which was unusual, but not unheard of on outsourced crews. He had asked for more. The contractor had pushed back on privacy grounds. He had let it sit. He closed the laptop now and leaned back in his chair. The thing that bothered him was not that she had stood there. People did strange things at 2 in the morning. What bothered him was the quality of the stillness, the particular way she held herself outside that glass wall, looking in at a room full of everything he had spent 15 years building. Like she had stood there before, many times before. He had told security to keep an eye on her, not to approach, not to say anything, just to note if it happened again. He still hadn't been able to explain that instruction to anyone, including himself. He picked up his phone from the desk. The screen showed a missed call. Number he didn't recognize. No name, no contact match. He scrolled back. Same number 2 days ago. And 4 days before that. 3 times in 1 week. He stared at it for a moment. Then he pressed and held until the screenshot function activated the screen, flashing white, in the dark office. He put the phone down, looked back at the closed laptop. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Atlanta sat quiet, under a black sky, the city lights blurring slightly in the humid air. 12 miles east, though he had no way of knowing it, a woman was sitting at a kitchen table in a yellow house, looking at the same darkness from the other side. 2 floors below, Margaret, at that same hour, a man named Ray Decker was pushing his own cleaning cart down the 22nd floor corridor at a pace that had nothing to do with cleaning. He moved slowly, deliberately. His eyes tracked the elevator bank at the far end of the hall, the way a person watches something they have been watching for a long time, without urgency, without obvious interest, with the particular patience of someone who has learned that patience is the only tool that never runs out. Ray Decker was 58 years old, broad through the shoulders, the kind of broad that used to mean something, and now just meant he took up more space than the job required. His gray uniform was the same as everyone else's on the night crew. His name badge said Ray. No last name, same as Margaret, same as most of them, same as the contractor preferred for a crew that was meant to be invisible. He had spent 14 years as an investigator with the Atlanta Police Department before a misconduct review had ended that chapter of his life quietly and permanently. After that 8 years running his own private practice surveillance work, mostly the kind that involved long hours in parked cars and the steady erosion of any remaining belief that people were on balance better than they appeared. He had been good at it. That was the honest truth. He had been very good at it. 18 months ago, he had been approached by a legal representative working on behalf of a group of plaintiffs involved in a civil case against a mid-size Atlanta healthcare company. The case centered on allegations of fraudulent billing practices, insurance claims filed for services that records suggested had never been provided, paperwork that bore signatures in places where signatures shouldn't have been. The representative needed someone inside the building, someone who could move through the space without attracting attention, someone who knew how to look without looking like they were looking. Ray had taken the work. He had applied to the same facilities contractor that serviced Cole Medical Tower, accepted a position on the night custodial crew, and shown up for his first shift 14 months ago, wearing a gray uniform and a name badge that said Ray and nothing else. The pay was $11.50 an hour. He had not worked for $11.50 an hour since he was 19 years old. He did not think about that anymore. He noticed Margaret Arlene on her third night. It wasn't anything she said. She said very little to anyone on the crew, a quality that Ray, who also said very little, recognized and respected. It was the way she moved. Most people on the night crew moved with the specific efficiency of people who wanted to finish and go home. Margaret moved differently on certain floors. She slowed down. She paid attention in a way that went beyond the work. On the 38th floor, she didn't just clean. She was careful in a way that reminded Ray of something he had seen once in a documentary about restorers who worked on old paintings, that quality of attention that said, "This matters to me in a way I am not going to explain." He filed it away and kept watching. It took him 3 months to find out who she was. He was thorough about it. He didn't rush. He pulled her first name from the contractor roster, cross-referenced it with the building's tenant records, ran a search on Margaret Arlene with an Atlanta address and an approximate age range, and eventually arrived at a Margaret Arlene Cole, retired registered nurse, formerly of Grady Memorial Hospital, resident of Vine City. He sat with that name for a long time before he ran the next search. Nathan Cole, founder and chief executive of Cole Medical Group, son of Margaret Arlene Cole. Ray had been in this business long enough to understand that coincidences existed, but were far less common than people wanted to believe. A woman with no apparent financial need working the night shift in her son's building, under a partial name assigned to the floor directly below his office, cleaning his workspace with the kind of care that went well beyond a job description that was not a coincidence. He didn't know yet what it was, but he knew it was something. So he waited. That was what he did. He waited, and he watched, and he let Margaret move through the building the way she had been moving through it. And he cataloged what he observed, and he kept his distance, because the worst thing a person in his position could do was move too soon on information that wasn't fully assembled yet. 14 months. He had been patient for 14 months. Tonight on the 22nd floor, at 1:34 in the morning, he had watched Margaret step off the elevator from the 38th floor with something different in her posture. A tension that hadn't been there before. The particular way a person carries themselves when they are holding something they don't know what to do with. He thought about the timing. 14 months of watching. The case moving toward its conclusion faster than anyone had anticipated. The legal team growing impatient in the way that legal teams grew impatient, with increasingly pointed questions about whether he had anything actionable or was simply running up hours. He made his decision. He took out his phone and typed a message to a number he had memorized rather than saved. 11 words. Mrs. Cole, we know you work in the building. We need to talk. Tonight. He sent it. Watched the delivered notification appear. Then he scrolled to a different number, his contact at the legal firm, the one who answered at any hour, and pressed call. It rang twice. Tell me you have something, the voice said. Ray kept his eyes on the elevator bank. She has something, he said. Give me 48 hours. 731 nights is not a number that means much in the abstract, but lived one at a time in a gray uniform, pushing a cart down the same hallway at the same hour, it becomes something else entirely. A parallel existence running alongside the visible one, quiet, unannounced, completely invisible to the person it revolves around. This is what 731 nights looked like. In March of the first year, Margaret found a prescription bottle pushed to the back of the supply drawer in the 38th floor pantry behind a box of protein bars. She picked it up, read the label. Pain management, lower lumbar. She stood there longer than she should have. Nathan had been 16 the afternoon he came down wrong during a varsity game, his body twisting at an angle that made the gymnasium go quiet for 3 long seconds. She had been in the bleachers. She had reached him before the coach did. She remembered the sound he made when she touched his lower back. Not a cry, just a sharp exhale. The sound of someone trying to be tougher than the pain. He had always walked things off. She put the bottle back exactly where she found it. She didn't say anything to anyone. She just made sure from that night forward that the pantry was always clean, and the small things that made a long day marginally easier were always quietly taken care of. In August of the same year, on a Thursday night, in the middle of a heat wave that had settled over Atlanta, like something that intended to stay, Margaret was working the conference room 2 doors down from the corner office when she heard her son's voice through the wall. Not the words, just the tone. She knew that voice through every register it had ever found. The voice he used when he was confident. The voice he used when he was performing confidence for someone else. The voice he used at 8 years old when he was trying not to cry and thought he was doing a better job of it than he was. This was the last one. Someone holding something together at the end of a very long day, running low on whatever holding things together required. She stood in the hallway with her cart, and she did not go in. She could not go in, not without explaining everything. And she was not ready. So she stood there and listened to his voice through the wall and could not hold him. And she finished her shift and drove home to Vine City in the dark. In the second year, she began leaving things, small things, the kind that leave no signature. Every morning, before she finished the floor, she filled a clean glass with water and set it on the left side of his desk, the side his hand went to automatically when he was reading. She reorganized his filing system quietly, matching the logic she had observed in his stacking patterns. She replaced the overhead bulb 2 weeks before it would have burned out because she had been watching it dim for a month. He never asked where the water came from until one morning in February when he did. His assistant didn't know. Security didn't know. Facilities had no record of it. Nathan pulled the camera footage that afternoon and found what he was looking for. A figure in a gray uniform filling the glass, crossing to his desk, setting it down on the left side, without measuring, without guessing, like someone who already knew. Then she stopped. She stood in front of his photographs for 4 minutes and 17 seconds. He watched the timestamp move. He watched her stand completely still in the low light of an empty office, and when she finally walked out, he sat back and looked at the ceiling. He watched the footage again that evening, and the evening after. Each time he told himself he was looking for something specific, something that would resolve the question and let him move on. Each time he ended up back at those 4 minutes and 17 seconds, with the same feeling he couldn't name sitting in the middle of his chest. On a Sunday afternoon, he picked up his phone and opened his contacts. Mom. His thumb rested on the screen without pressing. He sat like that for 3 full minutes. He checked the time afterward because it felt longer, and he needed to know if it was 3 minutes exactly. Then he locked the screen, set the phone face down, and went back to the report he had been reading before. He did not call, but that evening, when he gathered his things to leave, he opened the camera folder one more time, looked at the footage, looked at the 4 minutes and 17 seconds. He did not delete it. That was the part he couldn't explain, not to his security team, not to himself. In 15 years of building something, he had developed a reliable instinct for what information was useful and what was noise. He had built an entire organization on knowing the difference. This he kept, without knowing why, without being able to name what he was holding on to. He just knew he wasn't ready to let it go. She heard it at 5:47 in the morning. The elevator chime, single tone, clean and sharp, cutting through the particular silence of a floor that had been empty for hours. Margaret went still. She was in the middle of the hallway, outside the executive restroom, cart beside her, a fresh liner in her hand. Her shift ended at 6. She had 11 minutes left on the 38th floor, just the east corridor and the supply closet, to wrap up nothing she hadn't done 1,000 times. 11 minutes was nothing, except the elevator didn't chime at 5:47. Not on this floor. In 731 nights, she had learned the rhythms of this building, the way you learn the rhythms of a house you've lived in for years, which sounds were routine and which ones weren't. The executive floor didn't get foot traffic until 7 at the earliest, usually 7:15. 5:47 was 45 minutes too soon. She didn't wait to think it through. She pushed the cart to the supply closet at the near end of the hall, opened the door, rolled it inside, and pulled the door shut behind her. All of it in under 20 seconds. The movements automatic, practiced the muscle memory of someone who had been rehearsing this particular exit without fully admitting that's what she was doing. Then she went for the stairwell. The door was at the far end of the corridor, past the conference rooms, past the glass wall of the corner office. She moved fast, not running, because running made noise, but the fastest walk a 65-year-old woman with 38 floors between her and the ground floor could manage without her shoes announcing it. Her shoes. 2 years of polished marble and service stairwells had worn the treads down to almost nothing. She had told herself twice that she needed to replace them. She hadn't, because replacing them meant a trip to the uniform supplier, which meant paperwork, which meant a name on a form, and she had been careful about names on forms from the beginning. She pushed through the stairwell door and let it close behind her, slowly, one hand flat against the metal frame, easing it into the latch without a sound. She pressed her back against the wall. On the other side of the door, she heard the elevator open. Footsteps, single set, unhurried, the stride of someone who owned the floor they were walking on and knew it. She heard them cross the marble toward the far end of the hall, toward the corner office, toward the supply closet, where her cart was sitting behind a closed door. She knew that walk. She had known it for 41 years. She had watched it develop from the unsteady, determined toddle of a 14-month-old who had decided, apparently without consulting anyone, that it was time to start moving upright, through the loose-limbed run of a boy who was always in a hurry to get to the next thing, into the measured, deliberate stride of the man on the other side of this door. She would have known it anywhere, in any building, at any hour. Her son stopped walking. She heard it, the absence of sound, where there had been sound, the specific quiet of someone pausing in a hallway for no obvious reason. Her hand, which had been pressed flat against the stairwell wall, curled slowly inward. He was close. She didn't know exactly where, somewhere in the east corridor, near the supply closet, or just past it. 20 feet, maybe 30, the length of a living room, the length of the hallway in the yellow house in Vine City, where his photographs lined both walls, and stopped at 28. She did not breathe. She had stood in the trauma bay at Grady Memorial and held herself completely still while she waited for a reading, a signal, some indication of which direction things were going to go. She had stood at her son's bedside at 4 a.m. and watched his chest rise and fall, and made herself breathe slow, and even so that her own panic wouldn't fill the room. She had stood outside this building's service entrance on the first night and told herself she could do this. She could be invisible. She could be the kind of person who takes up no space. This was harder than all of it. The footsteps started again, moving away from her down the hall toward the corner office, the regular rhythm resuming like a recording that had been briefly paused. She heard the soft sound of the glass door opening, then nothing. He was in his office. She stood in the stairwell for another 30 seconds before she trusted herself to move. Then she opened the door slowly, one hand still against the frame, and slipped back into the hallway and walked to the elevator bank without looking toward the corner office. She did not look. She had learned a long time ago that some things were harder to walk away from once you had looked directly at them. She pressed the button for the service elevator, waited. When the doors opened, she stepped inside and turned to face front, and it was only then, in the stainless steel reflection of the elevator doors, that she noticed the wetness on her face. She hadn't felt it happening. That was the part that caught her. She had been so focused on being still, on being quiet, on taking up no space, that somewhere in those 30 seconds in the stairwell, her eyes had made a decision her body hadn't announced. She didn't wipe her face. She just looked at her reflection until the doors opened on the ground floor. She was walking through the service exit when her phone buzzed in her pocket. A message. Same number as before. The one she hadn't answered, the one she hadn't saved, the one that had been sitting in her inbox since yesterday morning, like something she wasn't ready to open. Clock is ticking. You have until Friday. She stopped walking. She looked at the message. Then she looked down at her shoes. The worn treads, the scuffed toes. 2 years of this building's floors pressed into the soles. She put the phone back in her pocket without responding. But she didn't delete the message either. The cleaning crew clocked out at 6. By 8 o'clock, the 38th floor had transformed the way it transformed every morning lights at full brightness, the hum of the ventilation system, stepping up a register, the particular energy of a place shifting from empty to inhabited. Nathan had been at his desk since 6:45. Working through the stack of briefings his assistant had left the night before drinking coffee that had gone lukewarm without him noticing. He heard Vincent before he saw him. The easy roll of a laugh in the hallway, outside a quick word with someone at the assistant's desk, the natural social ease of a man who had never once walked into a room and wondered whether he belonged there. Vincent Marsh was 47 years old, co-founder of Cole Medical Group, and the closest thing to a business partner Nathan had ever fully trusted. They had met at a healthcare conference in Washington 12 years ago. Nathan, with a single clinic and a second one under construction. Vincent, with a background in medical administration and a gift for the operational side of things that Nathan, who thought in vision and mission, had never been naturally strong at. They had shaken hands over bad conference coffee, and by the end of the weekend had sketched the outline of what would become over the following decade one of the most recognized community health networks in the Southeast. 12 years. That was not nothing. Vincent came through the door with the particular energy he always carried on Wednesday mornings. Something about the middle of the week suited him, like he hit his stride once Monday and Tuesday had cleared the decks. He was dressed well as always. Salt and pepper at the temples now, which he wore without apparent concern. He dropped into the chair across from Nathan's desk, the way a man drops into a chair in a room he has spent years in. "You look like you slept here," Vincent said. "Clothes," Nathan said. Vincent smiled. It was a good smile, genuine, the kind that reached the eyes, the kind that had made investors comfortable and staff loyal. And Nathan, for 12 years, feel like he was never entirely carrying this thing alone. "How are you holding up?" Vincent asked. Nathan set down his coffee. "Honestly, always. I'll feel better when it's done." He meant the federal inquiry, an ongoing review that had been sitting on the company's periphery for the better part of a year. The kind of thing that didn't threaten operations directly, but created a low-grade pressure that accumulated over time, like a sound you couldn't quite locate. Vincent nodded slowly. I hear you. But Nathan, listen. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, the posture of someone about to say something they want landed carefully. We have nothing to hide. You know that. I know that. Let them look. Let them go through every file, every record, every signature on every form. When they're done, they're going to find exactly what we've been saying all along, a company that has done the work right from the beginning. He said it the way he said most things evenly, without excess, with the calm of someone who had already made peace with the outcome. Nathan looked at him. 12 years of reading this man across tables, across funding meetings and board sessions, and the occasional genuine crisis, had given him a particular fluency in the way Vincent communicated. He knew the difference between Vincent performing confidence and Vincent feeling it. He had seen both enough times to tell them apart. This looked like the real thing, and yet there was something not in what Vincent said, but in the slight pause before he said it. A half-beat, barely perceptible, the kind of thing you wouldn't catch unless you were already on some level listening for it. Nathan filed it without naming it the way you file a sound in a building that you can't immediately identify. Not alarming, just noted. You're right, Nathan said. We do good work. We do great work, Vincent said and stood. He straightened his jacket with the ease of a man with somewhere to be and the confidence to take his time getting there. Dinner Thursday, I want to walk through the quarterly numbers before they go to the board. I'll have Sarah put it on the calendar. Vincent gave a short nod, raised a hand in something between a wave and a salute, and walked out. Nathan heard him say something to the assistant in the hallway. Another easy laugh, a brief exchange, and then the sound of him moving toward the elevator. Nathan looked at his desk. He had been working that morning from a set of documents he had assembled over the previous 2 weeks, a private file kept in the locked lower drawer on the left side that he had been building quietly and without telling anyone, including Vincent. Not because he suspected anything specific, because he was the kind of person who, when something made him uneasy, preferred to understand it fully before deciding what to do about it. He opened the lower drawer. He went through the documents once. Then again. One page was missing. The summary sheet, the one that connected the threads, the one he had printed 2 nights ago and annotated by hand in the margins. He checked the drawer twice more, then the surface of the desk, then the folder on the left side where he kept active materials. Not there. He looked at the trash can beside his desk. The liner was fresh and clean, the way it was every morning when he arrived. He stood there for a moment, with his hand resting on the edge of the desk, looking at the empty trash can, thinking about the sequence. The document had been on his desk 2 nights ago. The cleaning crew worked between 10 and 6. He had come in this morning to a clean office and a missing page. He pressed the intercom. Get me Marcus, he said. Marcus Webb, his head of overnight security, a former military policeman who had worked the building for 6 years, and who Nathan trusted precisely because the man asked clarifying questions before he acted rather than after. Marcus appeared in the doorway 3 minutes later. I need the camera footage from this floor, Nathan said. Last night, all of it. Marcus nodded once and left. 20 minutes passed. Nathan worked through 2 briefings without retaining much of either. When Marcus reappeared in the doorway, his expression had changed in the specific way the expression of a careful, composed man changes when he has seen something he was not expecting. Sir, Marcus said, you need to see this. Marcus set the laptop on the desk and stepped back without being asked. That was one of the things Nathan valued about the man. He understood instinctively the difference between information that needed explaining and information that needed space. He pulled up the file, positioned the screen, and moved to stand near the door, in the way of someone who was present but not intruding. Nathan sat down and pressed play. The footage was from the hallway camera outside his office. The same camera, the same angle, the same quality he had pulled 3 weeks ago when the water glass first appeared on his desk. and he had gone looking for an explanation. Timestamp 1:23 in the morning. The floor dark, except for the emergency strip lighting along the baseboards, the kind that stays on regardless. A figure came into frame from the left. Gray uniform, cleaning cart, the measured pace of someone who knew exactly where they were going. She pushed through the glass door and went inside. Nathan watched her work. She was thorough. He had always noticed that about the footage on every viewing. Not perfunctory, not the quick efficiency of someone counting minutes until their shift ended. Deliberate. The desk, the shelves, the small sink in the corner, then the trash can. She reached in once, then a second time. Her hand came out with a folded document, several pages, held together, the kind of thing you could feel the weight of, even on a low-resolution screen. She didn't unfold it. She looked at it for a moment, just a moment, not long enough to read anything, and then she tucked it into the front pocket of her uniform beneath her name badge and went back to finishing the room. Nathan paused the footage. He had watched this woman 41 times before tonight. The first time was 3 weeks ago, when the water glass mystery had led him to the camera files, and he had found her standing outside his office in the dark, completely still for 4 minutes and 17 seconds. He had watched that footage because he was looking for an explanation. He had kept watching it because the explanation hadn't come, and the feeling the footage produced in him had not resolved the way feelings usually resolved when you sat with them long enough. Tonight was different. Tonight, there was a missing document and a different camera angle and a quality of light he hadn't had access to before the emergency strip along the baseboard, catching her from below, filling in shadows. The hallway camera had always left dark. He pressed play again. She finished the room and came back into the hallway. She stopped the same stop he had watched 41 times, the pause outside the glass wall that he had never been able to fully account for. But tonight, the angle was different. Tonight, the light was different. He could see her hands. She had them clasped in front of her fingers, interlaced, held at about waist height, in the particular way a person holds themselves when they are trying to stay very still. It was a specific posture, not uncomfortable, not anxious exactly, more like a form of self-containment, the posture of someone who has something large moving around inside them, and has decided through long practice to hold it rather than let it show. Nathan had seen that posture once before. He had been 22 years old, standing at the edge of a hospital corridor at Grady Memorial, while his grandmother was in surgery, and his mother had been standing a few feet away from him, with her hands clasped, exactly like that fingers, interlaced, held at waist height, completely still. And he had known, without asking, that she was frightened, and had decided not to be frightened where he could see it. He leaned forward in his chair. He had loved his mother the way a person loves something they have placed on a high shelf. Carefully, distantly, out of reach. He had put her there not in anger, but in the accumulated weight of years of building and pushing and needing every available part of himself pointed in one direction, and finding gradually that the direction didn't include the yellow house in Vine City, or the hallway of photographs, or the woman who had sat beside his bed at 4 a.m. when he was 12 years old and hadn't left. He had told himself she was fine. He sent money on the 1st of every month, automatic, reliable. He kept the Sunday reminder on his phone. He had dismissed it 39 times, and he knew the number because he had counted it once late at night, and the counting had not made him feel better. He looked at the hands on the screen, the fingers interlaced, the particular stillness of them, the way they held each other, the way hands hold each other when the person they belong to has run out of other things to hold on to. He knew those hands. He had known them his entire life. He had held one of them crossing streets as a boy, had felt both of them on his face when he was sick, had watched them move through a kitchen with the specific efficiency of someone who had been feeding another person for so long that the motions had become indistinguishable from instinct. He knew those hands. He had, just for reasons he was only beginning to understand, in a way that was arriving not as a thought, but as something older and less articulable than thought, not allowed himself to know them. He sat back. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Atlanta was fully awake now, the mid-morning light hard and white on the glass towers to the south. Inside the office, it was quiet. Marcus had not moved from his position near the door. The laptop screen glowed on the desk between them. Nathan looked at it for a long moment. Then he said quietly, and without looking up from the screen, "Get me the employee file for the night custodial crew. All of them. Now." Marcus left without a word. Nathan reached forward and closed the laptop. The screen went dark. He sat in the silence of his office and looked at the place where the image had been. The hands were gone from the screen. They were not gone from the place behind his eyes, where certain things lodged themselves and refused to move. He had built 14 clinics across this city. He had kept a promise he made at a kitchen table when he was 18 years old. He had done the work every day without stopping. He had not called his mother in 9 months. He sat with that in the quiet of his office, with the dark screen in front of him, and the city going about its business outside the window. And for the first time in a very long time, he did not reach for the next thing on his list. 11 hours had passed since Nathan Cole sat alone in his office and did not reach for the next thing on his list. In those 11 hours, the building had gone through its full cycle, the day shift clearing out floor by floor between 5 and 7, the lobby emptying the lights, stepping down to their overnight setting, the service entrance on the east side, opening at 10 to let in the night crew. 14 people with carts and supplies, and the particular silence of workers who had learned that the best way to move through a space was to move through it as though you weren't there. Margaret had been on the 22nd floor for 40 minutes when Ray Decker stepped out of the corridor, supply room, and blocked her path. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, cart beside him, in the middle of the hallway, in a way that required her to stop. His expression was not threatening. It was something more precise than that, the expression of a man who had been waiting a long time for a specific moment and had finally arrived at it and intended to be efficient. "We should talk," he said. Margaret looked at him. She had noticed Ray Decker the way she noticed most things, gradually, then with increasing clarity. He was on the crew. He kept odd hours, even by the standards of the night shift, and he moved through the building with a quality of attention that reminded her uncomfortably of herself. "I'm working," she said. "So am I," Ray said. "That's what we need to talk about." He said it without performance. No particular menace, no visible satisfaction. Just the flat delivery of someone communicating a fact they had already organized in their head. "I know who you are," he said. "I know who your son is. I know you've been on this floor for 2 years, under a partial name, and I know you have something in your possession that you took from a trash can on the 38th floor, sometime in the last 48 hours. He paused. "I need that document." Margaret said nothing. "I've been in this building for 14 months, Ray continued. "I work for a legal team that's been building a case against Cole Medical Group. The document you're holding, or something like it, is the kind of material that changes the shape of a case. I don't know exactly what's on those pages, but I know you took them instead of leaving them, which means you read enough to understand they matter." He let that land. "I'm not your enemy," he said. "I want you to understand that clearly. What I'm doing here has nothing to do with your son personally. It has to do with a pattern of conduct that—" "I know what it has to do with," Margaret said. Her voice was even. That was the thing about 23 years in emergency medicine. You learn to keep your voice even when everything else wasn't, because the voice was the first thing people responded to, and you couldn't afford to lose the room before you'd had a chance to work the problem. Ray looked at her with something that might have been the beginning of reassessment. "Then you know the document needs to be in the right hands," he said. "I'm still working out whose hands those are," she said. Something shifted in his expression, not much, but enough. He reached into the front pocket of his uniform and took out his phone. He turned the screen toward her. It was a photograph. A restaurant upscale, the kind with low lighting and tables, spaced far enough apart for private conversation. 2 men at a corner table caught mid-handshake across the white linen. One of them she recognized from the photographs on the 38th floor shelf From the articles in the folder she kept in her kitchen drawer, from 2 years of looking at a face she had been watching over without being seen. The other man she had never seen before. But the third person at the table, seated to the side, a leather portfolio open in front of him, the posture of someone present in a professional, rather than social capacity, she recognized the type immediately. She had seen enough hospital legal teams in her career to know what a lawyer looked like when they were working. "That dinner was 3 weeks ago," Ray said. "The man across from your son is named Vincent Marsh, his co-founder. The lawyer beside them represents the plaintiffs in the case against Cole Medical." He let her look at the photograph for a full 10 seconds before he continued. "Your son doesn't know that meeting happened," Ray said. "He doesn't know what was agreed to at that table. And unless something changes in the next..." He checked his watch. 9 hours. He's not going to have the opportunity to find out before it's too late. Margaret looked up from the phone. "The original deadline was Friday at 5, Ray said. "The legal team filed an emergency motion this afternoon. The judge approved it 2 hours ago. New deadline is tomorrow morning, Thursday, 9 a.m. He put the phone back in his pocket. "If your son doesn't have documentation that contradicts what's been filed by 9 o'clock tomorrow, the ruling goes through without his response on record." The hallway was quiet around them. Somewhere on a lower floor, a cartwheel squeaked against the marble, one of the other crew members, working through their rotation. Unaware that anything unusual was happening 22 floors up, Margaret stood very still. In the emergency room, there was a moment that came sometimes in the middle of a complicated situation, a moment when the noise fell away and the variables arranged themselves into something simple and clear. Not easy, clear. You knew what had to happen. You knew what the cost of inaction was. And you moved. She looked at Ray Decker. "Get out of my way," she said. She pushed her cart forward. He stepped aside, not reluctantly, not with any particular drama. He simply moved the way a man moves when he has made his point and is willing to wait for the conclusion to arrive on its own terms. She walked past him toward the elevator. She did not look back. Ray watched her go. He stood in the empty hallway with his cart and listened to the sound of her wheels on the floor growing fainter. And he did not reach for his phone to call anyone, because there was nothing left to report. She had what she needed. She knew what he knew. And she had 9 hours. The rest, he understood, was no longer his to manage. The service elevator opened at 12:03 in the morning, and Margaret stepped out onto the 38th floor alone. The hallway was dark. She took one step forward, and the first motion sensor panel flickered on above her. Another step, another panel, then the next. The lights came on only because she was moving through them, and would go dark again the moment she passed, returning the floor to the quiet it preferred when no one was asking anything of it. She had thought about that more than once over 2 years. The way this building came alive, one panel at a time, as she moved through it, necessary and invisible at the same time. Not so different, she had come to understand from a lot of things in her life. She stopped at the end of the hall, the corner office, his office. The desk lamp inside was on low, the kind of light a room holds when its occupant has stepped away but hasn't left for the night. She had seen it enough times to know what it meant. Her son was still in the building working past midnight, the way he had been working past midnight with increasing frequency over the past several months. She reached into her right pocket and took out her phone. The voicemail had been sitting there since 4:17 yesterday afternoon, 20 hours. Dr. Patricia Ellison, her cardiologist, 6 years. A precise and unhurried woman who called when she had something to say and did not call otherwise. She had called 3 times in the past 2 weeks. Margaret pressed play. Mrs. Cole, calm, measured, the careful voice of someone who had learned to carry difficult information without letting the weight show. "I've reviewed your most recent results, and I want to be direct with you. The recommendation for surgical intervention stands. Given the progression we're seeing, I would strongly advise scheduling within the next 2 weeks. Without intervention, the risk of a cardiovascular event increases significantly. Please call the office at your earliest convenience." The message ended. Margaret lowered the phone. 2 weeks. She had known this was coming in the way you know things you have been half knowing for a long time, in the way your body communicates with you, in a language that doesn't use words. She was a nurse. She understood what risk of a cardiovascular event increases significantly, meant when the careful sentence was set aside and only the meaning remained. She put the phone back in her pocket. She looked at the office in front of her. The desk lamp, the folders on the left side, the shelf with its photographs. In the far corner, the dark frame, the woman and the boy, the yellow house angled toward the desk, the way she had adjusted it 100 times. She had been standing in front of this glass wall, on and off, for 731 nights. She had never timed it deliberately, but she knew from the weight of the silence, from the particular stillness of this hallway at this hour, that some nights it had been several minutes, 4 minutes and 17 seconds, perhaps. The same amount of time her son had watched her stand here on the security footage he had pulled weeks ago. Neither of them had known in those separate moments that the other was counting the same silence from opposite sides of the same glass. Him with a timestamp and a screen. Her with nothing but the particular weight of missing someone close enough to touch and too far away to reach. She reached into the front pocket of her uniform and took out the folded document. She held it in both hands, felt the edges, the paper softened from hours against her body, the faint impression of a red stamp on the corner. She thought about the photograph Ray had shown her, the corner table, the white linen, the handshake, and the open portfolio beside it. Her son was in that office right now, working through the night, not knowing what had been arranged 3 weeks ago by someone he had trusted for 12 years. She thought about a kitchen table in Vine City, a boy of 18 with a backpack by the door, and a promise she had believed completely. She raised her hand. 731 nights in front of this door. Not once had she knocked. There had always been a reason too soon, not ready one more night. She had been so careful for so long about not disrupting this invisible proximity she had built. This way of being near him without asking anything of him. Her knuckles were 2 inches from the glass. The door opened. Nathan stood in the doorway in his shirt sleeves, jacket, gone a file folder, in his left hand, the forward lean of someone mid-motion, not expecting anything on the other side of a door except an empty hallway. He stopped. In his right hand, slightly angled outward, was a manila folder, a photograph clipped to the front, small, badge-sized, slightly grainy. A woman's face, quiet expression, the kind you wear when someone tells you to smile and you are thinking about something else entirely. Margaret looked at the photograph. The photograph looked back at her. Nathan's eyes moved from the folder to her face and back to the folder and back to her face, and the silence between them was the specific silence of a man doing arithmetic he had not expected to be asked to do. Neither of them spoke. 1. Nathan counted without deciding to count. It was something his mind did when it needed time to process what his eyes were telling it. Breaking silence into units, making something measurable out of something that wasn't. 2. 3. The woman in front of him was 65 years old, gray uniform, name badge on her chest, a folded document held in both hands, pressed flat against the front of her uniform, like something she had been carrying for a long time and had decided finally to put down. 4. 5. He looked at the badge photograph in the folder he was holding, then at her face, then at the photograph again. The photograph was small and slightly grainy and had been taken under fluorescent light, and the woman in it was looking at the camera with the quiet, private expression of someone whose mind was somewhere else entirely. At the moment, the shutter clicked. 6. 7. He had spent 42 viewings trying to see a face clearly in the low light of a security camera. The face in front of him now was the same face. He understood this the way you understand something that your body has already accepted before your mind has finished the sentence. 8, 9, Mama, 10, 11. Read this first, she said. Her voice was steady. She held out the document. Everything else after. He took it. He moved back into the office, not deliberately, just the automatic backward step of someone making room. And she followed him in, and he sat down at his desk, the way a person sits when their legs have made a decision before the rest of them caught up. He opened the document. He read. She stood near the door and watched him, the way she had watched him read things his entire life. The particular forward tilt of his head, the slight crease between his brows that appeared when he was working to understand something rather than simply absorbing it. He had done that at 10 years old, over his math homework, at the kitchen table in Vine City, hunched over the page with a pencil in his hand. And he was doing it now, at 41, at a desk, in a building with his name above the entrance, and the posture was exactly the same. Some things did not change. She had always found comfort in that. She watched his face as he moved through the pages. There was a moment around the third page. She estimated where something shifted. Not dramatically. His expression didn't break. But she had spent 23 years reading people in the moments before they understood what was happening to them. And she recognized the specific quality of stillness that comes over a person when information rearranges the order of what they thought they knew. He turned the last page, read to the bottom, sat back. He did not speak for a long moment. He looked at the document in his hands. Just looked at it, the way you look at something after you have finished reading it but are not ready to let go of the physical object yet, because letting go of the physical object means the next thing begins, and you are not certain you are ready for the next thing. Then he looked up. He looked at her face first. Then slowly, his gaze moved down to the gray uniform, to the name badge, with its single name and no last name, to her hands, where they rested at her sides. Her hands. He had seen those hands on a screen 42 times. Grainy footage, poor light, a camera angle that showed shape without detail. He had known something about them, had felt the specific weight of knowing, without being able to name what he knew, and had not let himself follow the knowledge to where it led. He was looking at them now in full light 3 feet away, and there was nothing between him and what he was seeing. The knuckles were swollen at the first joint on both hands, the particular swelling that came from repetitive gripping, from the kind of work that asked the same motion of your hands every night for 2 years running. The palms had new calluses, the hard, smooth kind, built up over time in the specific places where a mop handle sat. The skin across the back of her hands was drier than he remembered. He remembered those hands soft. He remembered them on his forehead. He remembered them packing his lunch in the dark of a 6 a.m. kitchen in a yellow house in Vine City, moving with the automatic efficiency of someone who had done it so many times. The action had become a form of love rather than a task. He had watched those hands stand in front of his photograph for 4 minutes and 17 seconds, 42 separate times, and told himself he didn't know whose they were. He stood up. He wasn't certain, afterward, exactly how he crossed the distance between his desk and where she was standing. It was not a long distance, maybe 8 feet, but he had no clear memory of the steps. He was sitting, and then he was standing in front of her, close enough that he could see the tiredness around her eyes, the particular tiredness that accumulated over 2 years of overnight shifts and early mornings, and a secret held so carefully that it must have weighed something real. He looked at her for a moment, this woman in a gray uniform, in his office at 12 in the morning, who had pushed a cleaning cart down his hallway for 731 nights and never once knocked on his door. Then, something that had been held in place for a very long time stopped being held. His head dropped forward. His shoulders moved in the way. Shoulders move when the thing a person has been carrying becomes too heavy for the muscles that have been managing it. Not a sound, just the movement, just the body finally saying what it had not been asked to say. Her hand came up and found his shoulder, the same hand that had calluses where a mop handle sat, the same hand he had watched on a screen 42 times without letting himself know it. She patted his shoulder in the slow, steady rhythm she had used since he was 8 years old and couldn't sleep since he was 12. And the fever broke, and he didn't know how close it had been since every moment in between. where he needed something solid, and she was what was there. "Mama's here," she said quietly. "Mama's been here." He made the call at 1:17 in the morning. Margaret sat in the chair across from his desk, the low chair along the wall, the one reserved for visitors, and listened to her son speak to his attorney with the particular calm of a man who had already used up whatever he had available for falling apart and was now by necessity operating on the other side of it. She had never heard him sound quite like that before, controlled in a way that was different from his ordinary control, the kind of controlled that came not from composure, but from its absence, from having moved through something and come out the other side, where the only available option was to keep moving. She looked around the office while he talked. She had been in this room 731 times. She knew every surface of it, the grain of the desk, the specific lean of the bookshelf's second shelf, where one of the anchoring screws had worked slightly loose, the way the overhead light distributed itself unevenly across the rug. She had cleaned all of it night after night with the thoroughness of someone for whom the work was never just the work, but she had never sat in it before. It looked different from this angle, larger somehow, and also more personal. The accumulated evidence of a life lived at high speed, visible in the organized disorder of the desk and the wear on the armrests of his chair, and the row of photographs on the shelf that told the story of everything he had built since the morning he left Vine City with a backpack by the door and a full scholarship and a promise she had never stopped believing in. She looked at the photograph in the far corner, the woman and the boy, the yellow house. Nathan ended the call and set the phone on the desk. He sat back. He looked at the ceiling for a moment, the way a person looks at the ceiling when they are organizing themselves after something that has reorganized them. "The documents are sufficient," he said. "More than sufficient. He's filing a response tonight. It'll be on record before 9. Margaret nodded. "He said," Nathan stopped, started again. "He said, whoever held on to these, they held on to the right things." He looked at her when he said it, not with the tone of a compliment, with the tone of a man who was still assembling what it meant. She didn't say anything. He leaned forward, both elbows on the desk hands, loosely clasped, the posture she recognized from every difficult conversation he had ever steered himself through back to the first time he was 12, and tried to explain to her why he had stayed out past curfew, and known halfway through the explanation that he was going to have to tell the truth. "How long?" he asked. 2 years, she said. The silence that followed was not empty. It was the specific silence of someone receiving information they had, on some level, already known, and were now being asked to know fully and out loud. He sat with it. She let him. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. His voice had changed slightly. Not louder, not softer, something in the register. The question of a man who was genuinely asking, not performing the asking. Margaret looked at her son across the desk. She thought about how to say it simply, because the simple version was the true one, and the true one was what he needed. "If I had told you I was sick," she said, "you would have come home for the surgery. You would have rearranged your calendar and sat in the waiting room and brought me soup and checked in every day until I was recovered. And it would have been kind, and it would have been the right thing." She paused. "But I didn't need you to come home for the surgery." Nathan was very still. "I needed you to come home for me," she said. "Not because something was wrong, just because I was there. Because that's—" She stopped. Her hands, resting in her lap, pressed slightly together. "That's the only thing I ever really needed, baby. I just didn't know how to say it without it sounding like an accusation. And I didn't want it to be an accusation. You built something real. You kept your promise. I've never once stopped being proud of that." The desk lamp threw its low light between them. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Atlanta was deep in the middle of its night. The city lights steady and indifferent, the skyline doing what it always did, which was nothing, because buildings did not pause for the things that happened inside them. Nathan looked at his mother for a long moment. Then he pushed back from his desk and stood. He reached for his jacket, which had been draped over the back of his chair since sometime that afternoon, and he walked around the desk and he placed it across her shoulders, Not a gesture. A fact. The simple physical act of a man who had looked at his mother in a gray uniform in his office at 1 a.m. and understood, without needing it, explained that she was cold and that he was the reason, and that the jacket was the smallest possible beginning of the distance he had to cover. She let it settle onto her shoulders without comment. He stood there beside her for a moment. Then he reached down and picked up the manila folder from the corner of the desk, the one with her badge photograph clipped to the front, and held it without opening it. "Let's go home, Mama," he said. She looked up at him. "Which home?" she asked. It was a quiet question. No sharpness in it, no demand. Just a question that had been waiting a long time to be asked by someone who had earned the right to ask it plainly. Nathan stood beside his mother in his office at 1:17 in the morning, holding a folder with her photograph on it. And he did not answer right away. Not because he didn't know. Because the question deserved more than a quick answer. And he was, for the first time in a long time, willing to give something the time it deserved. He answered the question by driving east. 12 miles on the interstate. The city thinning as he went. Glass towers, giving way to lower buildings. Lower buildings, giving way to neighborhoods that had not been redesigned. Streets that looked the way they had looked when he was a boy. He turned onto the street at 3:22 in the morning. The oak trees were still there, the branches reaching across the road and meeting in the middle, making a tunnel of shadow that the headlights couldn't fully penetrate. He had not driven under these trees in 14 months. He pulled up in front of the yellow house and cut the engine. The wooden gate his father had built the summer Nathan was 7. Harold Cole gone now 8 years. A quiet man who expressed his love through the things he made. The gate still hung straight. Someone had repainted it. He knew without asking who. The front steps, painted gray. Done twice by his mother alone. He knew because she had mentioned it during one of the 10-minute Sunday calls, the kind of detail that entered the conversation quickly and left it the same way, because he hadn't known how to hold it properly at the time. He got out of the car, walked through the gate, up the steps, through the front door, which she had left unlocked, the way she always left it when she was expecting him, even when she had no reason to expect him. He stopped at the entrance of the hallway. He had looked at these photographs 10,000 times. It was not the same now. He was looking from the other side of something, and from the other side, everything looked different. Nathan at 4, with the plastic baseball bat. At 9, in the too big suit. At 14, on the court, mid-jump. At 18, graduation cap. The smile of someone who believed the best part was just beginning. 24, 28. Then, the wall went blank. Not because nothing had happened. He understood that now, more fully than he ever had. He had spent his entire adult life reading that blank space as neutral an absence of photographs, rather than an absence of something specific. It was not neutral. It was the record of every room he had been in without her. Every year that had moved too fast for anyone to stop and say, "Come stand here beside me. I want to remember this, with you in it." He walked to the kitchen. His mother was already at the stove. She had changed out of the gray uniform into the pale blue house dress she had owned for as long as he could remember, moving with the easy, unhurried certainty of a woman who had cooked in this kitchen for 30 years and knew every inch of it without looking. She did not turn around when he came in. She reached for the wide, cream-colored bowl, slightly chipped on the rim from an incident he vaguely remembered from around age 11, ladled from the pot, and set it on the table at the chair that had been his since he was 5. The one with the wobble in the back left leg that she had never fixed because he had always meant to do it himself. Cornmeal porridge. The smell of it reached him before he had fully processed what was in the bowl specific to this kitchen, to this woman, to every fever and hard morning of his childhood. His body recognized it before his mind caught up. He sat down. He looked at the food. He looked at his mother's hands as she set the spoon beside the bowl, the swollen knuckles, the new calluses, the skin dryer. Then he remembered. The hands he had watched on a screen 42 times without allowing himself to know them. The hands that had sat beside his bed at 4 in the morning when he was 12 years old and had not left. Something gave way. Not the way it had given way in his office, the controlled release of a man managing what was happening to him. This was different. This was a kitchen in Vine City at 3:30 in the morning. The chair beneath him was the chair he had sat in since he was 5. The smell in the air was the smell of every time in his life he had needed taking care of, and someone had been there to do it. He bent forward. His face went into his hands. He didn't make a sound. He didn't need to. Just the shaking, the particular helpless shaking of a man who has held something at arm's length for so long that his arms have finally given out, and the thing has arrived all at once without asking permission. His mother pulled her chair closer. She sat down and put her hand over his on the table. Warm, solid, present. She left it there the way she had always left things, without condition, without a clock on it, without needing anything in return. Outside the kitchen window, the sky above Atlanta was beginning to change. The deep black loosening at the edges, the first suggestion of something lighter moving in from the east. Not dawn yet, but the dark giving way, the way it always gave way, whether anyone was watching or not. Nathan straightened slowly, wiped his face, looked at his mother beside him, her eyes steady, her expression the same one she had worn every time in his life. She had waited for him to come back together. He turned his hand over and held hers. She reached over and nudged the bowl an inch closer. "Eat, baby," she said. "It's getting cold." He looked at the bowl. He looked at her. He picked up the spoon. He ate. 5 hours and 25 minutes after Nathan Cole sat down at a kitchen table in Vine City and ate a bowl of cornmeal porridge at 3:30 in the morning, Vincent Marsh walked through the lobby of Cole Medical Tower and stopped. He stopped because of the 2 men standing near the elevator bank on the left side of the lobby, the side that led to the executive offices. They were not building staff. They were not vendors or contractors or any of the other categories of people who moved through this lobby between 8 and 9 in the morning. They were dressed in the specific way that federal investigators dressed when they wanted to be recognized as federal investigators without announcing it. Dark suits, lanyards, the particular quality of stillness that came from training rather than temperament. One of them was holding a document. Vincent stood in the lobby for approximately 4 seconds. Then he turned and walked back toward the revolving door. The 2 men were faster. By 7:15 that morning, Nathan's attorney had filed the response with the court. The documents Margaret had carried in the front pocket of her uniform for 36 hours. The pages she had smoothed, flat on a kitchen table in Vine City, under a breakfast lamp. The pages she had tucked beneath her name badge and carried through hallways and stairwells in a confrontation on the 22nd floor. Those pages had arrived exactly where they needed to be at exactly the right time, in the hands of exactly the right person. The response was on record before 9. At 9:03 in the morning, a phone buzzed in the lower level of the building in the break room that the night custodial crew used between shifts. The room was empty at that hour. The night crew had clocked out 3 hours ago. The day crew was already on the floors above. The buzz echoed slightly against the metal lockers. Ray Decker was the only one there to hear it. He had not gone home after his shift. He had come down to the break room and sat in one of the plastic chairs and waited the way he had learned to wait, without expectation in either direction, without investing in an outcome he couldn't control. He had done what he could do. He had made his move. The rest had belonged to a 65-year-old woman in a gray uniform, and he had understood, watching her push that cart away from him on the 22nd floor, that she was more than capable of finishing what he had started. He looked at the message on his phone. 3 words from the number he had been reporting to for 14 months. Deal is off. He read it once, set the phone on the table, looked at the row of metal lockers along the far wall, dented at the corners, the paint scuffed from years of use, the kind of furniture that existed in rooms where people stored the things they needed for work and didn't think much about otherwise. He opened his locker, took out his street clothes, changed methodically the way he did most things. folded the gray uniform and set it on the shelf, removed his name badge. Ray, no last name, and placed it on top of the folded uniform. He picked up his bag, looked at the room one more time. Then he walked out and the door swung shut behind him. And that was the last anyone in that building saw of Ray Decker. Nathan was standing at the windows of his office when his phone rang. He had been there for 20 minutes, which was unusual. He was not a man who stood at windows. He was a man who sat at desks and moved between rooms and kept his body engaged in something productive at all times, because standing still had always felt to him like a form of falling behind. This morning, he was standing still. He was looking at something he had never looked at before, which was the east side of the building, from 38 floors, up the street-level view, the service entrance, the concrete ramp that sloped down to the loading area, where the facilities trucks came and went. A door in the east wall, metal unremarkable. The kind of door that existed in every building in this city, and that no one who worked above the 5th floor had any particular reason to notice. The night cleaning crew came in through that door at 10 o'clock every evening. He had known this in the abstract way. You know things that your building manager has mentioned in a facilities update email. He had not known it the way he knew it now, standing at this window on a Thursday morning, looking at a door he had never used and a ramp he had never walked, and thinking about the number of times over the past 2 years that his mother had come through that entrance and taken the service elevator to his floor and pushed a cart down his hallway and cleaned his office and stood in front of his photographs and then gone back down the same way she had come without anyone holding the door for her or knowing her name. 731 times. He had been in this building for all of them. 12 miles away for none of them. His phone rang. He looked at the screen. "Mom." He answered before the second ring. "How's the coffee?" he asked. A pause. He could hear the kitchen, the small sounds of a house in the morning, the particular acoustic of a room he had grown up in. "Cold," his mother said. "Come home earlier next time." He almost said something practical. He almost said, "I'll try," or "things should ease up after the quarterly." The automatic responses of a man who had been managing expectations, including his own, for 15 years. Instead, he said nothing. He just stood at the window and listened to the sound of his mother's kitchen in the morning and let it be what it was. "I will," he said. He meant it in a way he had not meant it before. He ended the call and stood looking at the east door for another moment. Then something shifted in his face. Not a performance of something, not the managed expression of a man in a professional setting. Just a smile. Small, unguarded, the kind that arrived without being invited. He reached for his phone and opened his calendar. 9:30, board strategy call. 45 minutes, 2 action items to prepare beforehand. He pressed cancel. A confirmation box appeared. "Are you sure you want to cancel this meeting?" He pressed confirm. He set the phone face down on the desk. He looked out at the city. He let himself stand there, at the window in the quiet of his office, on a Thursday morning, doing nothing at all. It was the first time he had canceled a meeting in 3 years, for a reason that had nothing to do with business. It would not be the last. The email arrived at 10:23 in the morning, while Gloria Reyes was on her hands and knees in the second-floor utility corridor, replacing a ceiling vent filter. She almost didn't check her phone. But the notification buzzed twice in quick succession, which was unusual, and she had learned over 8 years to pay attention to unusual things. She sat back on her heels and looked at the screen. The sender was BuildRight Services HR. She opened it expecting something routine, a schedule update, a compliance reminder. She read it once, then again, then a third time slowly, the way you read something when the words don't fit any category you've been trained to expect. Night operations. Supervisor Cole Medical Tower. Effective immediately. Salary adjustment, 40% increase. Full medical coverage. Premium paid entirely by the employer. Retirement contribution matched at 5%. The position had been created at the direct request of the building's primary tenant. She called the HHR number. A woman answered on the second ring. Gloria read her the reference number and asked her to confirm. Yes, the woman said. That's correct. Was there a mistake? No mistake. Mr. Cole, personally, requested this. The position and the terms. Gloria thanked her and ended the call. She finished replacing the ceiling vent. She had a discipline about finishing things, gathered her tools, and took the service elevator to the basement. The break room in the lower level of Cole Medical Tower had 2 plastic tables, 6 mismatched chairs, a microwave, older than anyone on the crew could reliably date, metal lockers, dented at the corners, and a bulletin board with the shift schedule pinned beside a laminated OSHA sheet that had yellowed at the edges. Gloria Reyes had eaten lunch in this room for 8 years. She sat down at the table nearest the lockers and set her phone in front of her, with the email still open on the screen. Gloria was 49 years old. She had come to the United States from Guadalajara at 26 with a work visa and a cousin's address in Atlanta, and the particular determination of someone who understood that starting over required accepting, for a time, that you would be invisible. She had cleaned hotel rooms, in medical offices, and commercial buildings, and had never once called in sick, and had never once asked for anything she hadn't earned, and she had learned somewhere around year 4 to stop doing the math on what the people in the offices above her made compared to what she made, because the math was a weight she couldn't afford to carry and still do the work. She had noticed Margaret Arlene the first week she joined the crew 2 years ago. Not because Margaret said anything unusual, because of the way she moved, the way she slowed down on the 38th floor, the attention she brought to the corner office at the end of the hall, the quality of care that went beyond thoroughness into something that had no name in a job description. Gloria had been around enough people doing work they had reasons for to recognize when someone was doing work they had reasons for. She had never asked. That was not how the night crew operated. She understood now, sitting in the break room with the email in front of her, a little more of what those reasons had been. She understood that Margaret had not needed this job. She had understood that for a long time the quality of her shoes, before they wore down the way she spoke, the vocabulary of someone whose life had not always looked like this. She had not needed the hourly wage or the fluorescent lights or the plastic chair. She had been here anyway. For 2 years, she had shown up and done the work, had pushed the cart and carried the supplies, and knelt on the marble floors and cleaned the surfaces of rooms belonging to people who would never know her name, had done it with a care that went beyond what the job required, in the way that certain people bring more of themselves to a task than the task has any right to ask for. And in doing it, she had understood something from the inside that most people only ever saw from the outside, if they saw it at all. Gloria thought about that. She thought about what it cost a person to set aside what they were, the name, the history, the accumulated weight of a life that had looked like something else entirely, and show up as Margaret, no last name, and do the work, and go home, and come back the next night, and do it again. 731 times. Her eyes were wet. She noticed it without embarrassment. She was not a woman who apologized for the things her body did when it was responding honestly to something real. She was not crying because of the promotion. She was not crying because of the insurance or the retirement fund, though those things were real and would take time to fully land. She was crying because of what she understood. Margaret Cole had not come to this building only for her son. She had come, and she had stayed, and she had worked alongside people like Gloria, people who did this work, not as an experiment, but because it was the work available to them, people for whom the hourly wage was not a temporary arrangement, but the actual shape of their lives. And she had lived that reality from the inside, every hour of it, the heavy carts and the cold floors, and the invisibility and the accumulated tiredness of work that the people upstairs never thought to think about. When you want to understand something, you get down on your knees and you learn it from the floor. Margaret had known that. There are 2.3 million people in the United States who clean the buildings where the rest of the country does its work. Most earn less than $15 an hour. Most have no health insurance. Most move through spaces full of people who do not know their names and have never thought to wonder what it costs a person to show up and do that work night after night in the hours when no one is watching. Most of them you walk past every single day. Margaret had gotten on her knees on the cold marble floors, and she had known it, not from a distance, not from above, but from the inside, where knowing actually changes something. Gloria looked at the email one last time. Then she set her phone face down on the table in the break room, where she had eaten lunch for 8 years, and she sat with it for a while. 3 weeks later, Margaret Cole woke up in a room that was not her room and looked at the ceiling and understood slowly that it was. The ceiling was higher than the one in Vine City. The light coming through the curtains was different. The particular quality of morning light filtered through the canopy of a neighborhood built higher and newer than the one she had lived in for 31 years. The mattress was softer than she was used to, which she had complained about once and intended to complain about again when she found the right moment. She lay there for a minute, the way she had lain in the narrow bed in the Vine City house for 31 years, listening to the building settle, taking inventory of herself, deciding in what order to approach the morning. Then she got up. She had brought 3 things from the yellow house. The first was a coffee mug, wide, ceramic, cream-colored, chipped on one side, at the rim, from some long-ago collision with the edge of the sink. She had owned it for 19 years. It held exactly the right amount of coffee and fit her hand exactly the right way, and she had no interest in replacing it with anything that came with a matching set. The second was her nurse's watch, analog second-hand, the kind worn on the inside of the wrist so you could read it while holding a patient's arm. She had worn it for 23 years and retired it when she left Grady Memorial, and it had sat in the top drawer of her dresser in Vine City ever since. She had packed it without thinking about it much, the way you pack the things your hands reach for before your mind has weighed in. The third was a photograph. The woman and the boy in front of the yellow house on a Sunday morning, the boy squinting into the sun, with a grin that existed before life got complicated. She had taken it off the shelf in the corner of her son's office, the dark frame, the one she had adjusted 100 times, without him noticing, and she had carried it to Buckhead in her coat pocket, and she had put it on the shelf beside the window in the room that was now her room, where the morning light reached it first. She made coffee in the chipped mug and stood at the kitchen window and looked out at the city. The surgery was scheduled for a Tuesday morning, 17 days after Nathan drove east on the interstate at 3:22 in the morning to answer a question his mother had asked him in a quiet office. He was in the waiting room when she went in. He was in the waiting room when she came out. He sat in the same chair for 4 hours and 17 minutes. She knew because she had asked the recovery nurse what time it was when she first came around, and she had done the arithmetic. 4 hours and 17 minutes. He had not opened his laptop. She knew this because he told her, unprompted, sitting beside her bed in the recovery room with a paper cup of bad coffee and the particular look of a man who had spent several hours alone with his thoughts and come out the other side, having thought some of them through properly for the first time. "I didn't bring it," he said. "The laptop. I left it in the car." She had looked at him over the edge of her blanket. "I know," she said. "I'm going to be different," he said, not with the urgency of a promise made in a heightened moment. With the quietness of a man stating something he had decided in a waiting room over 4 hours and 17 minutes and intended to carry out the way he carried out everything steadily, without announcement, one day at a time. She had reached over and patted his hand. "I know," she said again. 3 weeks after that, in the Buckhead apartment on the 32nd floor, with the higher ceilings, in the softer mattress, in the morning light that came in differently than the morning light in Vine City, Margaret Cole established the following routine. She woke before Nathan. She made coffee in the chipped mug. She stood at the kitchen window for a while. Then she cooked. Not every morning she was recovering, and her body was asking for consideration. She was learning slowly to give it. But most mornings, and every evening, without exception, before she went to bed, she put something on the stove or in the oven and left it covered on the counter. It did not matter what time Nathan came home. It did not matter whether he had called ahead or not, whether he had eaten already or was coming in at midnight from a meeting that had run long. The food was there, covered, warm if he was early, room temperature if he was late, but always there the way certain things were always there, not because they were convenient, but because someone had decided a long time ago that they would be and had not stopped deciding it since. He came home earlier than he used to, not dramatically, not all at once, a few minutes one week, a few more the next. She noted it without saying anything, the way she noted most things, quietly, accurately, without needing to make it into a conversation. Some things were better understood without words. Nathan never asked his mother why she hadn't simply knocked on his door 2 years ago. He already knew the answer. She had been knocking. Every night for 731 nights, she had knocked in the only way available to her, with a mop and a cleaning cart and a name badge that said, Margaret, no last name, and the particular care of a woman who had learned over 65 years that love was not mostly a feeling. It was mostly a practice, something you showed up for night after night, whether anyone was watching or not. He just hadn't been listening. The distance between them was never about miles. 12 miles is nothing. People cross 12 miles without thinking about it every day of their lives. The distance between them was about attention, about the slow, unintentional habit of looking past the things that mattered most, because the things that were loud took up all the available space. It was about looking down, about understanding that the people who love you most are often the ones who make the least noise about it, who show up in the hours you don't see, who take care of the things you never notice, who stand in the dark outside a glass door and do not knock, because they are afraid that if they do, you will tell them to go home. If this story moved you, if it reached something in you that recognized itself, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And tonight, before you close your eyes, make one phone call you have been putting off. The person on the other end has been waiting longer than you know.